When Tom Shea expressed interest in getting into agriculture, his grandpa knew a guy. Turns out that was Jim Garish.
Mentorship doesn't always come from where you think it's going to come from. Mentorship comes in a lot of different forms. It could be your grandpa knows somebody that happens to be at the top of their field, or it could be that you went to a conference and you just ended up talking to somebody that you really vibed with. I see some of my coworkers as mentors and they see me as a mentor. I'm like, dude, you're like 50. What do you mean I'm your mentor? And I think it just comes down to different perspectives, but valuing the untraditional mentorship is really important.
But the mentorship helped him think differently about what it looked like to be successful in agriculture.
There's different companies out there where you can take your sheep or your goats and throw them in the woods or a field and they'll pay you to graze it and manage it as a whole system. Where's the money coming from? Are we just selling a product or are we selling a service as well? And you can sell a service with sheep and goats and get that extra revenue where it's very hard to sell that service with cattle. It's amazing what 2 or 3 cycles of really heavy stocking density will do for some of that woody encroachment or those invasive weeds that you don't want.
All that and more on this episode 506 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Ranch Right, Create Coaches, Graze Magazine, and Sunshine Bible Academy.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Hi, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast. Very excited to be joined today by Tom Shea. Tom is a member of the National Grazing Lands Coalition, and he's also a first-generation farmer, rancher, however you want to phrase that. And he's involved in small ruminant grazing and some other things like that. And he's had just kind of an unconventional path into agriculture, but he's learned a lot of important lessons through that. And so that's what we're going to talk to him today about. Very excited to share this conversation with you right now. Tom, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you and kind of get to know you a little bit about what you guys are up to. And so, yeah, just I guess kind of start there as far as your background in agriculture and how you got started and what you've been up to.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, a kind of weird origin story into agriculture. I didn't grow up in ag at all. I'm an Army brat, so I moved around quite a bit, but spent most of my time between North Carolina and New York. So my mom's from Brooklyn, so I'm kind of the black sheep of the family when it comes to, how did I end up in ag? But kind of the wild story of that is sometime in high school, decided that I wanted to go be a cowboy and maybe be a veterinarian. And so I decided to try to study animal science in college and started doing that and kind of mixed it with conservation biology. And one day I was talking to my grandpa and he was like, I think my cousin Jimmy does something with cows and he might be able to let you come onto his ranch for a little bit. And I was like, sounds great, Grandpa, cool. And turns out cousin Jimmy was Jim Garish. So, got this excellent crash course of about 4 months with him in Idaho, where I really got to experience hands-on agriculture for the first time, and fell in love with it even more than I thought I would. So after that, he gave me connections to NC State Extension, which is where I went to undergrad. And kind of went from there, started cowboying during the summer and kind of after that, cowboying for a little bit, graduated and started looking for jobs. And in undergrad, I met my future wife and she was going to vet school in Minnesota. So I had the bright idea of, well, I guess I'm going to go to Minnesota too, and ended up in South Dakota somehow, thinking that Eastern South Dakota was significantly closer to Minnesota than it was, but managed a cattle operation there for about a year before I realized that the 4-hour drive every other week was just not doing it for us anymore, and found an opportunity to work for a custom grazing company just north of Minneapolis, and did that for a while. And that's where I got into small ruminants and really fell in love with all of the different aspects of small ruminants, from the custom grazing side. So the picture that I had for my background here is we're actually grazing on a solar field. So we manage solar fields with sheep, and then we also managed parks and woody encroachment with goats, and kind of really fell in love with that. And as someone that didn't grow up in agriculture, I found sheep were the opportunity to keep going in agriculture and do our own thing. So after my wife graduated from the University of Minnesota with her vet degree, we decided that let's try to go back to North Carolina for a little bit. And I worked for the extension service there for 3 years. And during that time, we were fortunate enough to buy a herd share into a sheep flock, and we managed that while we were here. And since we decided to move back to Minnesota for honestly the cost of land and the ability for 4 seasons, because in North Carolina you get 2 seasons, it's hot and less hot. And working sheep, trimming hooves and everything like that, and 105 degrees weather is just not where we want to be right now. So we're in the process of moving up there, and our goal is to continue. We manage a small ruminant association here, called the Sandhill Small Ruminant Association, and really focus on new and beginning farmers, and a lot of people that don't have that connection to agriculture but want to get into agriculture. And it's almost completely hands-on. We do 4 field days a year, usually once a quarter, kind of going in a 3-year cycle from, I've never touched a sheep before, to like, here's how you do your farm economics, kind of. And we've had a lot of great success with that, and we'd really like to continue that when we get up to Minnesota. And our goal is to breed starter flocks, so 10, 15 groups of sheep with a ram, and really help grow, agriculture even in a small way with people that are not connected, because succession planning is such a huge problem. It's probably not the best word, but challenge in agriculture.
Yeah.
And that's, where we are now.
Yeah, there's a lot there, obviously, a lot to cover, dive into a little bit deeper. So, but going back to kind of the beginning, do you remember, was there like a pop culture or something going on that piqued your interest in wanting to be a cowboy, or what was it that originally drew you into that lifestyle?
I think, both sets of my grandparents or my grandpas loved Westerns. And, we would spend, anytime we visit them, that's what was on TV is, John Wayne, kind of the good guy with the white hat. And I started doing, riding horses and stuff in high school, and was introduced to the NFR, and I was like, that's super cool. Like, that's what I want to do. And started competing in that a little bit, and didn't get very far because I started so late. When you're starting your junior year, it's kind of hard to get kind of far in there. But I think it started with a love of horses and a love of cowboy, like old Westerns, with connection to my grandparents.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool. And then, cousin Jimmy is Jim Garish. That's great. And you went out there and worked with him on grazing. Last I knew, he was grazing irrigated circles, and a lot of those are, I think some of those, are maybe all those, are going into a grass finishing program. Is that what he was doing?
Yeah,
then?
that's what we were doing out there, was a grass finish program and grazing on irrigated circles, a couple hundred acres, and completely blew my East Coast mind that we were moving water to these circles through these giant sprinklers. And it was so cool to learn that it wasn't even water that was coming from the ground. It was snowpack. learned all about water rights and when to fix the ditch and when to let your neighbor notice that the ditch needed fixing. And it was just a cool experience, and was able to do some day riding with different operations, and really learned so much. I did a talk in at CattleCon about mentorship a couple weeks ago, and um, I ended up, so I have a master's degree in veterinary science as well from the University of Illinois. So about 6.5 years of education, and I feel like I learned more in those 4 months out in Idaho for that first time doing hands-on thing on the actual management side than I did in those years of school. Those years of school, I wouldn't change though, like, learned a lot of detail and where to find information, which has helped me a ton. Um, but getting that hands-on experience, that deep dive, was probably one of the most influential parts of my life. And not just with, someone like Jim Garish, but I think finding a strong mentor is really the key to any industry.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Create Coaches. Hey, are you ready to turn your knowledge and skills into a new profession? Or are you already teaching but would like to beef up your technical knowledge of healthy agroecological systems? Create Coaches is Nicole Masters' 30-week training designed to train and empower consultants and coaches in the theory, principles, and practices behind healthy agroecological systems. Applications for the 2026 Create course open May 1st. For more information, check out www.integritysoils.com.
And I mean, it kind of sounds like you're taking that and replicating it, right, for people without experience in agriculture, and trying to get them the opportunity to have, a starter flock of sheep. And yeah, talk to me a little bit more about, I think you mentioned some courses, kind of a 4-part course. Is that right?
Yeah. So, we do, like, personally, I run small ruminant associations where we do hands-on courses that are really designed for those that don't really have that much experience in agriculture and want to get started. And it's largely geared towards veterans and military families as a way to kind of a cathartic healing sometimes in that way, and try to do as much with veteran groups as I can. The National Grazing Lands, who I work for, is working on a veterans coalition as well, with some of our partners out in California that are veterans based, but trying to, really build on those things. And then because of those things, personally, we've helped develop with the National Grazing Lands through our four regional managers, regional courses that we're working on doing this upcoming year in New York, North Carolina, Kansas, and Wyoming, and a wide range of, the one we're doing in New York, we're calling it the Ultimate Grazing School. It's a 2-day crash course where anything involved in managed grazing seems to be covered. Cover crops, browsing versus grazing, temporary fence versus virtual collars, kind of all aspects with a little bit of hands-on, where our course in North Carolina is going to be pasture revitalization after Hurricane Helene came through and really tore up a lot of buildings, but also it really affected the agriculture out in that area. So trying to help heal there. Our course in Kansas is looking at all of the grazing tools that you have in your toolbox. So, browsing versus grazing, virtual collars, and all that stuff, the different tools and technologies that are coming out. And our course in Wyoming is really focused on grazing the western landscape, out west. That you get towards Colorado, you get past west of Kansas, even West River of the Dakotas. And it's a whole new world. You're no longer looking at pasture, you're looking at range, and kind of helping people bridge the gap between those two things. So those are all things that we're really excited about.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I understand what you're saying. It's a whole different world out here. Yeah, I'm in West River, South Dakota, and uh, we're not talking about days or months of recovery. We're talking about year plus recovery periods and stuff like that before we can really start to think about returning to the same piece of land, and that includes the dormant season, as far as I'm concerned. Other people have a different perspective, but yeah. So I think that is a huge shift, right? Mindset shift, like you said, going from the East Coast uh, to Idaho, where you're grazing with runoff moisture from the snowpack and applying it with a gigantic sprinkler. It is a different world for sure, right?
Yeah. It's so different. And if you're, starting out, you have, where I'm at, we're 2-to-1, 1-to-1 on cattle,
Yeah,
cows per acre.
right.
And some of the places we go out west, they're like, yeah, we have 100 acres to one cow. And it's like,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
right. And it like you're 3-to-1 if there isn't management or
Yeah,
much management. You know, where like I know one of the best managers I know is 17-to-1 for
sure.
him, and he's double his neighbors.
Wow.
They're 35-to-1,
Yeah,
or 40 to
it's
1.
amazing what that management will do for you.
So, yeah, it is cool. Let's maybe also though think about what stayed the same, or what principles apply in both the East and the West. Maybe you have a bit of a unique perspective there. What would you say about that? What things kind of are still the same, even though moisture regimes are different? What's still the same?
Yeah, I think one of the big things we kind of touched on already is, you know, your management completely changes what you're able to do. If you're managing well, using your tools and your resources, you can have the number of acres that you need. Maybe even in some cases to a quarter of the acres that your neighbors need that are doing a more continuous system. And I think, that really changes the profitability of an operation. And that base principle applies no matter where you are. Um, Good management, good resource management, changes everything. It changes the whole system, and that's a huge thing that I like to look at, is looking at things as a system, no matter where I'm at, and seeing how water affects things, how different aspects of um, how you handle your cattle doesn't really change either. Quiet management makes things easier. As many touch points as you can get kind of stays the same. Everybody deals with drought. It just depends on what your definition of drought is. Here in North Carolina, we're in a drought if we don't get 30 inches of rain. There's places out west that get 6 inches of rain annually, and that's, they're like, what do we do with all this water? So, changing your perspective and just looking at that system, I think applies across the board. The principles apply across the board, and just utilizing what you can. Those little things gotta get tweaked, but at the end of the day, we're all doing it for the love of the game for the most part. No one's in it to get rich.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Ranch Right. We've been telling you for years about the power of working with the team at Ranch Right to help you acquire actionable financials so you can build a profitable business and pass on generational wealth. Don't just take our word for it. Listen to some of these responses on a recent survey of Ranch Right's clientele. 97% of them said they understood their financials better as a result of working with Ranch Right. 91% said Ranch Right saves them time, and over again in the survey, these ranchers say the value of working with the team at Ranch Right is the team. Many of them remarked that the conversations with their Ranch Right team member helped them see the opportunities they had for business growth and success. They used words like eye-opening and helpful to describe the reports, saying that they had more clarity about the next step as a result of the product of Ranch Right's work. Head over to ranchrightllc.com today to book your discovery call and see how Ranch Right can speed up your path to profitability.
Another thing that you mentioned there along the way is, you were kind of drawn to the sheep ultimately and the goats. Was it the fact that it was easier to get started from a capital outlay, and the capital intensiveness of getting started with sheep was less than cows, or what was it that drew you to sheep or ultimately brought you to them?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. A large part of it is what we could do with sheep on 50 acres is probably close to profitable, if not easily profitable, versus if we had that same acreage with cattle, it'd be very hard, even with great management, to become profitable just because of the ratios. We'll have the advantage of in Minnesota, there's a large population that's looking for sheep and goat meat, which adds to that value. But a large part of it is a handling side of things, because I have that master's in veterinary science, and my wife has, she's a veterinarian doctor. Is that handleability and infrastructure is a huge part of that. When I was in South Dakota, I was trying to treat a cow for mastitis, and we had put her in a milking stanchion. Thought it would be too much effort to run her through the actual working chute, and went in there and tried to clear out the mastitis, and she ended up telling me that she really didn't appreciate that by kicking my hand and breaking it in half. So, you know, that aspect, that safety aspect, if you have a job off the farm, is, you know,
Hmm.
really hard to get that injured from a sheep or a goat. And then the extra sources of revenue are a big aspect for me. Is that there's different companies out there where you can take your sheep or your goats and throw them in the woods or a field, and they'll pay you to graze it and
Mm-hmm.
manage it. And looking at, again, as a whole system, where's the money coming from? Are we just selling a product, or are we selling a service as well? And you can sell a service with sheep and goats and get that extra revenue, where it's very hard to sell that service with cattle.
Yeah. And among those services that are currently being sold and that you have had experience with is grazing solar farms. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a super cool opportunity for this mix of renewable green energy, what people want to say about it. And places like Minnesota have great programs that incentivize putting native grasses onto those solar fields, and then managing them with grazing animals, because you can't manage them to fire with the panels on there. And there's a lot of man hours that go into mowing, where we're able to build energy or develop energy with these panels. We're able to grow protein and grow the soil at the same time. And I think that's just a really unique, cool trifecta that we're not really used to seeing. And as crazy as it sounds, even though it's often zone industrial, we're able to keep that land in agriculture. There's not a lot of opportunity out there where we can develop something and still keep it in agriculture at that same time. And looking at statistics, I think 90% of the solar panels are recyclable after 20 years, and they're supposed to pull them up. And at that point, hopefully, if you've managed it correctly with your grazing practices, it should be relatively healthy grazing grounds that hopefully doesn't get sold off to development.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of a question I've always had about those. Are they so the solar panels won't block out the grass from growing? It's not like a temporary thing. We have to graze this until the solar panels, kill off the grass underneath. The grass is going to continue to thrive. Really, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And a lot of these panels are designed to follow the sun. So, throughout the day, all but maybe a 6 to 12-inch strip is exposed to the sun, and it's doing that photosynthesis process. And those native grasses, especially like little blue stem and gamma grass, seem to do really well under the panels, especially in like kind of sandy, poor soil.
Sure.
So
Yeah. They do well with the shade for
yeah,
a
they do
portion
really
of the
well with
day
the
anyways.
shade.
Yeah.
And we were grazing them because you're grazing for fire risk. So you wanna graze it relatively short. Um, as somebody that really values that residual, I would have loved to leave just a little bit more residual a lot of that time. But we're providing a service, so we have to follow what the customer wants, but we were still able to develop a lot of that root system because we would let it rest for 45 to 60 days, which is, in a grazing management system, still pretty good. And in that area of the world where we got a decent amount of rain, um, allowed for a lot of that recovery.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Graze Magazine. If you enjoy this podcast, you'll probably enjoy Graze Magazine. It's all about grazing, management, mindset, and learning from other producers doing the work. It's written by grazers for grazers, and it's been around for 25 years. It's not fluff, it's practical stuff you can actually use. They're offering Working Cows listeners $10 off an annual subscription. Go to grazeonline.com and use code WORKINGCOWS to get it. And then, so I've always wondered too, like sheep and goats especially are pretty ingenious in the ways that they'll go about reaching things that are supposedly out of reach for them. So there's no liability or concern with them damaging any of the solar infrastructure. Is that been
So
your
most solar
experience?
companies won't allow goats, because of that. They like to climb, they'll get on the panels and stuff. To put it politely, there was a learning curve about what a sheep could get into on a solar panel. And over time, we were able to work with the companies and the solar grazing companies that are successful, work with the companies and really emphasize like, hey, your wires have to be this far off the ground and their loop has to be really, really small. Um, Things like that. And one of the cool things, because agrivoltaics is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, they're starting to design the solar fields with grazing in mind. There's several companies that are doing that. They're putting in water infrastructure. They're making the panels a little higher. They're putting all the wires in a way that are covered. They're no longer exposed wires anywhere at all, and that's making this exponentially more feasible. There's even a group out of the University of Minnesota that's looking at cattle grazing under solar panels. One of the big reasons that we don't use cattle is the infrastructure cost to put the panels in. So, one of the statistics that I heard was for every foot that you go up with the metal to put the panels on, you have to go a foot down into the ground.
Yeah.
So if, for your cow to get under it, you have to have it 7-8 feet tall. You're looking at a 16-foot pole versus a 8-foot pole. And metal is expensive. But they're looking at the economics of if you're raising protein underneath that, is there a break-even point, which I think will open up a lot of revenue, because if you own the land, you're getting a lease cost from the solar company. If you're able to raise protein underneath that, you're going to get that protein cost. And most of these companies, because you're providing a service that they would have to mow anyway, are going to pay you to maintain the solar panel. So you're looking at 3 revenues of cost there, at least 2 if you're growing protein and providing a service.
Yeah, no, that's sounds like quite an opportunity for sure. I think another thing that you mentioned there, kind of as we were introducing, or you were introducing yourself, was browsing with goats. Has that been something that you personally had experience with, or just have kind of helped other people get into?
Yeah, one of the aspects we did was we also browsed parks, specifically for woody encroachment and especially weed management too. And it's amazing what 2 or 3 cycles of really heavy stocking density will do for some of that woody encroachment or those invasive weeds that you don't want. There's tons of studies out there that show what's effective and what not's effective, but it's so visually appealing to watch them clear out that area, and you'll see land that people have said has been unusable because you can't walk through it. You throw the goats out there for a couple of days, all of a sudden it's usable again.
Yeah. Yeah. And talk to me a little bit more about that. You're talking heavy stocking density. What are you talking about there?
We would put anywhere from 100 to 150 goats per acre per every 3 acres, in large paddocks, and just let them hammer it for 6 hours to a day.
Yeah.
And one of those situations we'd have to explain to customers like, hey, if it's under 6 feet tall and you want to keep it, you're going to need to put a fence around it, because it's not going to be left. But that really allows to open up that understory.
And then how often does that have to be done? I mean, is that something that needs to be done every couple of years, or does it kind of reset things to where it will grow grass better and have a more user-friendly space after that?
Yeah, you're really looking at a 3-year cycle. Kind of year 1, you hit it real hard with a really heavy density. Year 2, you come back, there shouldn't be as much regrowth. And then year 3, you're looking at most of it should be taken care of at that point. And then at that point, you're just doing maintenance every couple years.
Yeah.
So pretty strong investment up front. But that long-term management becomes a lot easier, and you're not using you don't have to go out there with a chainsaw, and you're not using any herbicides or anything like that.
What are the economics of something like that have in your experience?
Yeah, I was looking at a company because we want to start doing that again when we get to Minnesota to get one of those revenues, and anywhere from $400 or $500 an acre to $1,000 an acre to go out and manage that. There is a pretty significant cost. You need a pretty decent trailer. You need at least 50 goats usually, in order to get that density. So you need a trailer that can hold 50. You need to have some sort of mobile water management. And then depending on how far it is from your home base, you're looking at, driving out there every day, every other day. And then the temporary fencing cost on top of that. So pretty high startup. But when you're doing it regularly, it should pan out. I'm hoping things like virtual collars take away some of that cost and some of the, maybe you don't have to get out there every day to go check on them. You can look at your phone and see where they are on there with the collars and everything. Realistically, we're probably still a year or 2 out from that being a practical way to do that. I know there's some people doing it now. The technology just needs to catch up, and with how fast technology is catching up, it might outpace what we're doing anyway.
Is that a pretty small window where you can do that? Is it like in the growing season and then just...
Yeah, it's definitely a growing season. So depending on where you are in the world, May through October, maybe. But you're able to hit it pretty hard. And if you got that density going, you can hit a couple places, but that's also the limiting factor is how many places can you do that in one season?
Right.
Because it's expensive and there's only so many places that would value that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Another thing you mentioned there is also your work with Nat GLC and some of the courses that you've got coming up, and then also I know the bus tour is coming up in September of 2026 in Sioux Falls, around Sioux Falls. Do you have more details about that bus tour and kind of where some of those stops are going to be and some of that at all yet, or is that still being determined?
Yeah, so looking at the bus tour coming up September 23rd and 24th of this year, in 2026 is we're based out of Sioux Falls, but this is the first time that we are going to be able to hit 3 states. So we'll hit some operations in South Dakota, we'll hit some operations in western Minnesota, and then northeastern Nebraska. We're still nailing down what operations there are, but we're hoping to highlight really different operations to kind of get a full picture of what's going on. But it's a great opportunity. It's kind of like a mini conference on wheels, and it's really excited. We're able to get all of these producers together, and a lot of times they're coming from regions that are so different. They're getting that, they're able to go from the East Coast and get that Western perspective a little bit, or they're coming from Texas and getting that Midwest kind of area, if we're able to count Eastern South Dakota as part of the Midwest a little bit. But it's something I'm really excited for. We did the bus tour last year in Washington State, and that really opened my eyes. Kind of talking through the intro, I've worked in a decent amount of places in Idaho, Montana, and Minnesota, North Carolina, and New York, and stuff like that. Did not realize that central to eastern Washington was a desert. And that really opened my eyes to the stuff that they have going on out there. Because you think Washington, you think Seattle, and
Yep.
umpteenths of rain every year.
Yep.
But
Not 9 inches.
No, not 9 inches. And I was like, oh, I got off the plane and I was like, why is it 106 degrees out?
Yep.
But we'll have representatives from most of our boards. So we have 13 partner organizations that usually come, and this is one of the ways that us and Nat GLC stay producer-led and producer-driven, which I think is unique in a lot of these national organizations. A lot of them focus on legislation and those kind of opportunities, where us and Nat GLC, we really focus on education and kind of just want to keep the ball moving forward and, make operations as efficient and as we can. And we do that through that education, like kind of how I mentioned earlier. Mentorship is so important. And, there's formal mentorships out there, but then there's also the mentorship of just talking to each other and exchanging ideas. And I think that's the most value of conferences and bus tours like this, that there's just an exchange of ideas and perspective.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Sunshine Bible Academy.
I'm Tim Michelson. My wife Courtney and I have 3 of our children currently attending Sunshine Bible Academy. Our oldest 2 are seniors this year and started as freshmen 4 years ago, and our third is a sophomore and started as a freshman as well. We did not always plan to send our kids to Sunshine, although I graduated from Sunshine in '98 and my wife knew of Sunshine. She did not want our kids 250 miles from home during the week. Our kids were wanting to play sports, be in band, and be involved in other opportunities that homeschooling did not offer. When we attempted to let them do those things at the local public school, we realized that that was not the right fit. We toured Sunshine, and the kids felt very welcomed and wanted. Once at Sunshine, our son really grew to love the dorm life and refer to all the boys as his brothers. Our girls felt very accepted in the dorm environment as well. The dorm counselors in the boys and girls dorms have been outstanding mentors to our kids. And now, as we have toured colleges, the new dorms at Sunshine are nicer than any college dorms that we have seen. All 3 of them have excelled in music, art, and sports, and we have watched them grow in spiritual maturity and in understanding biblical concepts through yearly Bible classes, fellowship groups, chapels, nightly dorm devotions, as well as a biblical-centered curriculum in all their subjects. We highly recommend Sunshine for your high schooler to flourish and make lifelong friends.
If you want more information, you can find out more at sunshinebible.org.
So, in that part of the world, you would have lots of opportunities, of course, for a diversity of styles of operation. You might be able to find grazing dairies, grass-finished beef, cow-calf, small ruminant. Is that kind of what you're talking about as far as having a diversity of operations, even up to that level?
We're hoping to hit a multi-species grazing operation that has cattle and sheep and like small ruminants. Kind of your more traditional cow-calf operation. And we're trying really hard to find like a grass-finished dairy. It gets a little challenging because we don't want people to be on the bus for hours. So Western Minnesota gets a lot into that more beef side of things, but that's where we're hoping to highlight that small ruminant beef connection and see how those two ruminants work together as far as the benefits that come both to the land, but for animal health. Typically you're going to see like a reduction in predation and a reduction in parasite loads when you graze those animals together. So we'd really love to highlight that. The South Dakota side is going to be a producer that is well versed in educational things and has been an educator for a while. And I think that'll be a great opportunity to highlight not just the need, but the value that educating people has, both from passing on that knowledge, but the feelings that you get inside from passing on your knowledge, or the fulfillment that being an educator has.
It sounds like a great opportunity. Hope I hope to be able to be a part of it myself and join you guys on the tour and just seeing different country with different people from around the country. Like you said, that networking is as often as beneficial as anything, and just getting to sit next to somebody else and say, what are you seeing from your perspective, here, and how are you going to apply this when you get home, and some of those things. So I look forward to that opportunity. Looks like a great event.
Yeah, I'm real excited about it. And that goes back towards what we were talking about earlier about, no matter where you are in the country, the principles and the principles are the same. And, maybe that specific practice might not work for you, but the idea or the principle behind that practice might be something worth trying.
Right. And we kind of, in the course of your introduction, you talked a little bit about where you're headed. What do you hope your future looks like? What are you guys trying to get set up, and where are you guys trying to go?
Yeah. So, we're trying to really start our own thing. It's been real interesting managing for other people where they get a large say in the operation. And after I did that for the second time, I told my wife the next time that we have livestock, we're going to make all of the decisions. So, when we did the herd share, it was a really good mix of, we were able to make a lot of our own decisions, but there were still other chefs in the kitchen. And, we're really excited to get onto the really doing our own thing and helping out new and beginning farmers with these starter flocks. And I hope to train all of them, if not most of them, all of them definitely to temporary fence, to get them used to that kind of rotational grazing, amp grazing, kind of what your term of choice is as far as managed grazing goes. Because, training them to fence can get tricky and frustrating real quick if you've never done it before. But because I have a regional position, I travel, and the ability to use virtual collars to manage the animals while we're away or traveling. And I see virtual collars as a way for farmers and ranchers to get back to the idea of maybe having a break or a vacation as well. And just have someone check on them, but really develop a strong network for the Midwest to, through education and then also selling these animals, to be able to really start these, ideally 40 to 50 acre operations to keep that land working. And that's a large part of what Nat GLC's goal in general is. And really focusing on the problems that we see in small ruminant operations in particular. Small ruminants don't have EPDs yet, and they probably won't, because right now in the US, there's just not the market for it. Cattle are king in the US, but developing a genetically strong small ruminant and a ideally parasite resistant small ruminant to really take a lot of the heartache and challenge that that learning curve that new and beginning producers are going to have for that. And then mentioned earlier, I'm an Army brat, and one thing that's really close to my heart is the not just new and beginning farmers and ranchers, but new and beginning farmer ranchers that have a background in the military that are veterans. And we would like to take not only those starter flocks, but continue our small ruminant association and develop veterans programming. The more time I spend grazing with veterans, they always just talk about this healing aspect that comes with it. And that helps with that transition out of the military, that gives them something to do every day that keeps just moving forward. You've spent years and years in the Army or the military getting told what you need to do every single day. And all of a sudden you're out and you have to decide what to do every day, where the animals tell you what they need every day and kind of help go with that.
Mm.
So really would like to start like an internship program with a skill bridge, which is a military program that pairs those that are getting out for their last 6 months or so with a career that they're looking for afterwards. And we would love to be both a host farm for that, but also be able to, through developing a network with what we're going to hopefully call the Veterans Grazing Coalition from across the country. One of the things that I worked with in Extension was a skill bridge program that's great in North Carolina called Soldiers to Ag through NC State Extension Service. And it's a great program. There's a lot of opportunities, especially if you're staying in North Carolina. It, I don't think you could beat the program. But it's North Carolina focused agriculture, where if you're stationed in North Carolina for your last duty station, but you want to move to Wyoming, that is no longer just small acreage pasture with 2-to-1 cow to acre to cow ratio. You're looking at completely different things. So we're hoping to take veterans that want to move back home and partner them with a operation that's close to where they are going to be geographically. So kind of being a hub for that as well as kind of our ultimate maybe 10, 15-year goal is with those starter flocks and really getting a strong veterans program going.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would like to kind of wrap up. I'd like to talk to you about parasites and EPDs for small ruminants for bonus content if you got some time, but I'd like to wrap up, and it all kind of fits in with what we were just talking about, but just kind of giving you the opportunity to hit some of the high points of your recent talk on mentorship, some of the key takeaways and lessons learned for you as far as mentorship is concerned. What are some of the things that are top of mind when you talk about mentorship?
Yeah, I think mentorship doesn't always come from where you think it's going to come from. Mentorship comes in a lot of different forms. It could be your grandpa knows somebody that happens to be at the top of their field, or it could be that you went to a conference and you just ended up talking to somebody that you really vibed with. I see some of my coworkers as mentors, and they see me as a mentor. I'm like, dude, you're like 50. What do you mean I'm your mentor? And I think it just comes down to different perspectives. But valuing the untraditional mentorship is really important. Taking every opportunity, whether it was good or bad, as a mentorship opportunity. When I was managing operations, I didn't always have the best experience. And my dad, when he was in school, he went to West Point Military Academy, and I was like, Dad, what did you learn? He's like, that's one of the premier colleges in the United States. And he told me, I didn't learn anything there. I was like, wait, what a sec, wait, hold on. And he was like, what I learned there was what not to do as a leader. And that really stuck with me, is when I had operations or mentors that, most people wouldn't consider them mentors. They taught me a lot, but they taught me through example of how it made me how I felt. And I was able to be like, okay, that made me feel bad, how do I not do that to somebody? And I think when we use the word mentorship, we only ever put a positive spin on it.
Mm.
And I think it's really important to value all aspects of mentorship.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes the most clear way to see it is I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't kind of like your dad said, I don't want to do that, or like you said, I don't want to make people feel that way. So how do I approach it differently?
Yeah, and I think that goes to with your grazing management too. If you see somebody that's having parasite issues and you're like, what are you doing? And if they tell you what you're doing and you have other ideas, like, that's a great way to avoid making the same mistakes.
Yeah, certainly. One question I neglected to ask is you mentioned a couple of times these new and beginning farmer programs and trying to get those, and it's connected to this idea of membership too. And you mentioned a couple of times that it was a lot of times veterans coming into these programs, and yay for that. I love it. We've talked to some people doing similar work over the years as well, and really appreciate them and the work they're doing. But are there other paths that you see as well? Are there other common paths, or is there growing demand to get back into agriculture? Maybe even for the first time in generations, people coming back to agriculture. I mean, similar to yourself, but are you seeing that as a trend?
Yeah, I tend to see that as a trend a lot of times, and our new and beginning farmer programs are always open to anybody that wants to learn. Come with an open mind. And at CattleCon this last week, I gave my presentation about mentorship and had this guy come up to me afterwards, and he was like, "Can I get your card? I'm in college and I grew up just outside of New York City, and I've been studying I think he said animal science." He's like, "And I've been struggling on how do I get into agriculture? Like, where do I start? I have this degree, but I don't know what to do next." Um, and that just, really resonated with me because I was like, I did the exact same thing. I was like, um, spent a lot of time in Brooklyn, New York, spent a lot of time in pretty suburban North Carolina. I had no idea where to start. And I wish I had better access to some of these programs that I know about now. And, one of my goals is to just spread that information and educational workshops as much as possible. Whenever anybody asks me, where do I start? Um, I tell them to start learning before you buy. Um, you know, we hear the story all the time. Oh, I went out and bought, 10 cows. What do I do now? Sell your 10 cows, learn for a year or two, then go buy them again is what I'll tell people is so really open to whoever wants to learn. I really see this strong um people want to get out of the city. People want to get back to, maybe they're the second or third generation removed from the operation, and on the same side of that there's a generation that maybe wants to get out of agriculture. And I see, succession planning, maybe taking a turn and being a little less traditional is maybe getting somebody that doesn't have an agriculture background, but has education and the will to learn and wants to get their hands dirty. And maybe after a couple years, if, the operation doesn't have a son or a daughter that wants to take over, maybe you start writing them into that person that has that drive into your succession plan. And then that helps mitigate some of the land cost issues and keeps things in agriculture.
Yeah, certainly. No, that's great. I appreciate that perspective. Again, you got grazing courses coming up in New York, Kansas, North Carolina, and Wyoming, and the bus tour coming up in September in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I think information about all that can be found in the show notes page for today or grazinglands.org. Is that right?
Yep, that's exactly right. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook as the National Grazing Lands Coalition.
Very good. Tom, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clay. I really appreciate it. And it's good to talk to you.
Very good stuff there. Really appreciate Tom's perspective as a first-generation rancher, and really appreciate his perspective on mentorship and the importance of that and the power of that in his own life. Next up on the Working Cows podcast, I'm going to share with you a talk from the Rogue Food Conference. We recorded all the talks, and they are all available through the Rogue Food website or through patreon.com/workingcows. So I'm going to share with you one of those talks and just let you experience a little bit what it was like to be there. So look forward to sharing that with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.